every 4 years, the entire planet stops. Not just one country, not just one continent, the entire planet. And it all happens because of one tournament that makes every other sporting event on Earth look small. The Super Bowl is the most watched TV event in American history, and the World Cup final gets 10 times more viewers. Not 10% more. 10 times more. That's not a typo, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why. We're covering the raw numbers, the history, the cultural weight, the money, and the moments that prove the FIFA World Cup isn't just bigger than the Super Bowl. It's in a completely different category from every sporting event that has ever existed. Let's start with the numbers because they're genuinely hard to believe. The 2022 World Cup final between Argentina and France was watched by an estimated 1.5 billion people. 1.5 billion. Live. At the same time, the Super Bowl, which Americans rightfully celebrate as a massive cultural event, drew around 113 million viewers that same year. The World Cup final had more than 13 times that audience. Here's a comparison that puts it in perspective. If every single person in the United States watched the Super Bowl, that's still less than a quarter of the people watching the World Cup final. The entire population of America doesn't even come close to matching what the World Cup pulls in from the rest of the world alone. But here's something that makes those numbers even more shocking. That 1.5 billion figure is just the final. Over the entire 2022 tournament, cumulative viewership across all matches hit 5 billion. That's more than half the human population on Earth engaging with a single sporting event. There's nothing else in the history of organized competition that comes close to that number. Now here's where it gets interesting. Why? Let's talk about reach. American football, the sport behind the Super Bowl, is genuinely massive inside the United States, but it barely exists anywhere else. Canada has some fans, Mexico watches occasionally, and then it drops off almost completely. The NFL has tried for years to grow internationally, and while there's been some progress, the sport is still fundamentally American. Football, what the rest of the world calls soccer, is the opposite. It's the most played sport on Earth. Every country has a league. Every country has a national team. Every country has a generation of kids who grew up kicking a ball in the streets before they could read. When the World Cup starts, it's not one country's moment. It's every country's moment simultaneously. That's a difference in kind, not just degree. Here's a fact that blew my mind the first time I heard it. More countries compete to qualify for the FIFA World Cup than are members of the United Nations. The UN has 193 member states. FIFA has over 210 member associations. Football is literally more globally organized than the political body meant to represent all of humanity. Let that sit for a second. Now let's talk about history because the World Cup's age gives it something no American sport can buy. The first FIFA World Cup was held in 1930. Uruguay hosted it. 13 teams showed up. It was small, chaotic, and mostly ignored outside South America. But it was the beginning of something. By 1950, the tournament in Brazil drew 200,000 people to a single match. Still the highest attendance for any football game in history. By 1970, the tournament in Mexico was broadcast in color worldwide, and Pelé became the first global sports superstar in the modern sense. That's nearly 100 years of history, nearly 100 years of moments that passed from generation to generation. Grandparents telling their kids about the 1970 Brazil team. Parents telling their kids about the 1986 Maradona. Kids growing up watching the 2022 Messi tournament the way their parents watched the 1998 French team lift the trophy on home soil. The Super Bowl only started in 1967. It's enormously popular, and it's built genuine history, but it's competing with nearly a century head start. Now let's talk about what the World Cup actually does to a country when their team is in it, because this is the part that's hardest to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. In Brazil, when the national team plays at a World Cup, the country shuts down. Government offices close early. Schools reschedule around matches. Streets empty out during kickoff and then erupt after goals. The unemployment rate has actually shown measurable blips around major tournament dates because informal economic activity restructures itself around football. In England, every single World Cup campaign becomes a national conversation that bleeds into politics, culture, and media for months. When England were eliminated on penalties in 2018, it was front-page news across every newspaper in the country. The Prime Minister commented on it. It was treated like a national event, not a sports result. In Argentina, after winning the 2022 World Cup, the celebration lasted for days. Buenos Aires saw crowds estimated at 4 million people flooding the streets for the victory parade. 4 million people in a single city for a football result. No Super Bowl win has ever produced that kind of social reaction, and it's not because Americans love football less. It's because the World Cup carries weight that builds over 4 years across entire nations, connecting to identity, history, and pride in a way that a domestic championship simply can't replicate. Here's a counterintuitive thought. The World Cup is actually more emotionally powerful because it happens less often. The NFL plays every year, Super Bowl every year. If your team loses, there's always next season. The World Cup comes every 4 years. For some players, it's once in a career. For some countries, it's once in a generation. Argentina waited 36 years between their 1986 and 2022 titles. That wait is real. Every match feels enormous because there is no next year. There's just the next 4 years. And now let's talk money because the economics of the World Cup are staggering. The 2022 World Cup in Qatar generated an estimated $7.5 billion in revenue for FIFA alone. The Super Bowl, which is absolutely a massive commercial event, generates around $500 to $600 million in direct economic activity for the host city each year. The World Cup doesn't just beat that number. It doesn't even compare in the same frame. Sponsorship deals, merchandise, broadcasting rights. The World Cup commands prices that reflect its global audience. A 30-second Super Bowl ad costs around $7 million and is considered the pinnacle of advertising reach in America. World Cup broadcast rights are sold across hundreds of countries simultaneously, and the combined value of those deals runs into billions. Here's the 2026 angle that makes all of this even bigger. The tournament is coming to North America, the United States, Canada, and Mexico for the first time since 1994, and 1994 still holds the all-time World Cup attendance record. Americans showed up massively, but the sport was different then. The infrastructure was smaller. The American soccer culture was thinner. In 2026, the MLS has been growing for 30 years. Lionel Messi just finished playing in Miami. The U.S. men's national team is legitimately competitive. There are millions of first and second generation immigrants across the U.S. from countries that are football mad who have never had a World Cup this close to home. The 2026 World Cup is also the biggest ever with 48 teams instead of 32. More matches, more countries represented, more stories, more upsets, and it's sitting right in the middle of the most football-hungry moment American culture has ever seen. The Super Bowl is an iconic American institution. Nobody is taking that away. But when you zoom out, when you look at reach, history, economics, cultural weight, and pure emotional stakes, there's no honest comparison. The World Cup is the biggest thing in sports, not the biggest soccer event, not the biggest international event, the biggest thing in sports, period. If you never really understood why the rest of the world treats football the way they do, hopefully now you do. And if the 2026 World Cup is the first one you're genuinely watching, you picked the right year to start. Subscribe because we're going to make sure you understand every single moment of it.